I was expecting some Tibetan music, but but I can live with this. So it's really an honor for me to be here. I'm not a doctor. I'm not MD. I have PhD, but not an MD. So I don't really know uh, your world that well. But um, it has for some time has been one of the fields that I have been involved in seeing how some of the practices that I have been um, involved in my life may have some relevance to. So it's a great honor to share that with you today. Um, my familiarity with the medical world really, and the crisis, if I may say that, um, that the medical profession is facing, began in 2001. I was at the medical school in San Antonio at the invitation of Dr. Abraham Varghese, who wrote this wonderful book, Tennis Partner, and he brought me to give a workshop on meditation. And what I learned from him was that, of all the professions in America, the single profession that has the highest rates of suicide, as many as we heard earlier, like 400 per year, is among the physicians. And that was really a shock for me because I come from a very, very remote area in the Himalayas, a small place in northern part of India bordering Tibet, western Tibet. And, obviously we had the traditional doctors called amjis. These are more like spiritual healers, but they practice the herbal medicine and so forth. And my image of those traditional Tibetan physicians was that they actually thrived. I've never, as a kid, I haven't known that they were kind of struggling emotionally and like that. So that was a real eye-opening event for me. But over the years, that I've also become aware that actually there are many other issues the healthcare profession struggles. We have learned this morning, but I just have some slides here. This article in JAMA in 2016 brings you the statistic there, like within the medical school students, like 27% struggling with depression. Among the residency, 28% or so. Burnout, like as we learned to date, among the physicians, 54%. That seems really, really kind of shocking. My question to Dr. Varghese in 2001 was that why is it that healthcare providers, so the physicians and the nurses, struggle with depression and suicides and like that? I thought that this has to do something with the stress, and the day in and out, being with patient, seeing all the illness and so this must be really exhausting and depressing. But the answer he gave me was really kind of something that I wasn't expecting. What he said was that those are also true. That it is true that the physicians and the caregivers have to face intense kind of the ugliness and the disease and illness and the suffering. But he thought that probably main reason for this burnout or the depression and the issues had to do with the lack of training in the medical school. In the medical school curricula did not include how to manage emotions, how to manage stress, how to deal with the everyday inner struggles. So, and without the tools, I think it is. You can see that if we are exposed to various triggers of stress every day, it can become at some point unmanageable. So, burnout, like that as the theme here, one of the themes, that burnout, the major issues among the physicians, the cost of that is tremendous. Just the monetary cost. At Emory, we had a group that has produced a report called the Blue Ridge Report. It gives you this statistic here that $150 billion perhaps per year it may cost in money, but also there are all other unaccounted kind of costs that can be on the family members, and there are all kinds of other unaccounted costs of burnout that we can see. There are impact obviously on physicians, as we have learned that one of the main part is this loss of joy. That joy in work is something that characterizes thriving or the flourishing. But if one loses this sense of joy, in work, that can be very, very exhausting and contribute to burnout. But also disengagement with patients and increased apathy and erosion of professionality, the risk for kind of the mental issues and like that. It has also cost on patients, that when the physicians are burnt out, it may affect that how available the physicians are for emotionally and physically for the patients and so forth. And of course, it has a cost for the system, that when there is a community is languishing, that can have an impact on the community as a whole. So these are some of the things I'm just preaching to the choir here. I mean, you know this too well, but in terms of what contributes to this burnout, there are many factors. Of course, there is not one thing that contributes to the sheer amount of like the record keeping, to the workload, to all kinds of issues contribute to that. But the overarching kind of the contributor here, or the theme seems to be the stress, this chronic stress that comes with the profession. So what I'm going to offer here is, there are many different ways to deal with the stress or and its impact on burnout and so forth. But among many tools, of course, we need tools, as they said, that there is, no doubt that one significant dimension of addressing the problem of burnout is to give individuals tools and skills and motivation they need to practice self-care and well-being. So well-being, self-care seems to be very important. But what kind of tools do we have available that we can, bring about? So first, to do that, I think we need to kind of find out what are the sort of the major hallmarks of burnout. And as you well know, physical and emotional exhaustion is one lack of efficiency, as our speakers this morning pointed out, and depersonalization. This sense of kind of your relationship to the patients, and that has a lot to do with what kind of, how do we you view the people that you are attending to. As in the introduction, you heard that I'm a former Buddhist monk. I've been monk for 27 years before I gave back my vows, and because I fell in love, and then so I gave back my vows. So now I'm a kind of lay practitioner, but I continue to do practice in meditation. And when you look at the burnout or the other issues that we are, it's not just physicians, I mean, that the general population also is struggling with this. How do we kind of maintain resiliency. It seems like one of the things that can contribute towards resiliency is compassion. Compassion, like the Dalai Lama says, uh, compassion and love are not just mere luxuries. They are fundamental to the continued survival of our species. They are the source of all spiritual qualities of forgiveness, tolerance, and all the virtues. Moreover, they are the very thing that gives a meaning to our activities. Compassion, you all know so well, because you are in this profession because of compassion and the caring for others. Otherwise, you would not have gone in this profession. But it is also the difficult to maintain, sustain compassion. How do we sustain? How do we, sustain compassion, when faced with all these challenges? So, one thing that I want you to remember when you think about compassion, it has to do with, as the Dalai Lama points out here, the warm-heartedness. It has to do with the warm-heartedness. Compassion, not to think about something that, when somebody is fallen down, you reach out. That's external kind of help. It's an expression of compassion. But the compassion is an inner quality. It's the quality of the heart. When you feel warm-hearted, tender towards someone, that's what the compassion is. And that quality of heart is what, if we can cultivate towards ourselves or towards others, can nurture our own well-being and help us nurture the well-being of others. So, when it comes to compassion, in promoting resiliency, I think that we can see this as in three parts: receiving kindness or compassion, or that tenderness; self-compassion or self-care, the secondly. So the receiving is one part, and extending that to ourselves, or this is second. And then thirdly, how do we extend that towards our patients, our family members, and the co-workers and others? That's the third kind of the compassion. And that warm-heartedness has a lot to do with our resiliency, how we face our challenges. If you think of the resiliency, as Daniel Goleman, the author of Emotional Intelligence, he says that the hallmark of resiliency is how quickly you recover from the adversities or the challenges. Now, one of the things we know is that if we don't feel safe, it would be very hard to recover if we are experiencing certain threat or the certain exhaustion or the certain fear and so forth and so on. So I wanted to show this brief kind of video.
Good. Bandunji just attacked Malaya.
Okay, so as you noticed here, what happened? Like that, one of these, the young bonobos was attacked by another one, and he was in this distress, right? And then as soon as somebody else came and then put his arms, did this consoling, that gave the care, receiving that care, how it immediately kind of down-regulated that kind of the anxiety or the tension, and that the young bonobo calmed down. That is what I think, that receiving care is so important when it comes to our resiliency. So when we think about the resiliency, one of the people who has really worked in the resiliency field of resiliency is Elaine Miller-Carras, and we have worked with her in this program at Emory about creating a curriculum in social, emotional, and ethical learning. She talks about, she presents this, this is from her work. We as individuals, of course, the life is not perfect. That there are ups and downs in life. That is our reality. But if we are in the kind of resilient zone, that little bumps, little ups and downs, of course they will be there, but we can deal with that more easily. Just as you can see that when you are in the resilience zone, in the middle of those two dotted blue lines, it's not that it's sort of static or straight. Of course, there will be little ups and downs, but you remain still in that resilient zone. But now and then, that either some kind of real intense adversity, or sometimes accumulate as certain stresses accumulates, then it kind of bumps us out of that resilient zone. And then it can bump us into the high zone where we feel aggy and irritated. And, there's a lot of this angry outbursts and or intense pain and like that, where a lot of we remain in that agitation, and we can remain stuck there, and that can be very, very exhausting, and that can make us burn out eventually. Or when such challenges remain constant, that can also lead to, at a degree of hopelessness, and to eventually to numbness, the depression and exhaustion and fatigue, numbness and like that. And then we can also kind of get bumped out of the resilient zone into those kind of the low zones, what we call low zones. And the thing is that, if in life adversities, particularly in your profession, where you are facing, all these people with a lot of, the health issues and the difficulties, or where loss and so forth and so on, how do we kind of bring about that resiliency? How do we bring about that resiliency? So we know that, this adverse childhood experiences, from the study of adverse childhood experiences, we know that if we are exposed to early kind of adversities in our childhood, it is a very, very kind of difficult. It exposes us to many problems in the adulthood. For example, this study, one of the studies that done, giving number of the adversities that a child may face. If you see here that the link between this early childhood adverse experience and the chronic illnesses that expose one into the adult life. For example, if one has like up to 4 or more, you can see that how significantly higher heart rate in heart disease and diabetes, other the pulmonary lung diseases and so forth, hepatitis like the 240%, depression 460%, suicide attempts like over 1,000. Those who had 6 or more of those list of adversity in childhood, to become like the drug abuser, like over 4,000, and the longevity, like the 20%, lowering like to 20 years, that is a quite alarming kind of the situation. And unfortunately, a lot of the people have had this early kind of childhood experiences as well. But even if we haven't had early childhood experiences, exposed to the many of the adversities day in and out, can also eventually lead us to those high or low zones. So what I like to kind of share is some practical kind of exercises that as part of kind of this attuning to this compassion, or the caring, the warm-heartedness, if you will. One of the things any one of us can do is, connecting to what we call the nurturing moments, and that has to do with if we get better, for our resiliency, if we are out of tune with our own inner sensations, feelings, when we feel high or low, they are associated with the certain feelings. When we are very edgy or feeling numb and so forth, there are physical kind of the body is put in a certain kind of status, and in that there are physical sensations. If we are not attuned to our own sensations, feelings, and so forth, it will be very hard to adjust, to change. That. So, tracking, the one skill that we can develop is this skill of tracking. What was done earlier was beautiful, that mindfulness meditation with the beginning with the breath and the sensations. Remember, the sensations, going right into the feet, to calves and knees and so forth and so on. This is a wonderful way of learning to bring focus inwards, inner focus. What Dr. Goldman talks about is inner focus, bringing for self-awareness, awareness into our own emotions and thoughts and feelings. We have to have that tool, and that is what can be the very initial. Anyone will do it with these children, and that can be, with physical sensations. Or that initially, even before physical sensation, it can be about tuning to some external things like the sounds and like that. If you like, we can do it right now. That one attention, kind of attending is very much, it's like a lens. The where you orient the lens, that's what it will reveal. First, we can attune to the sounds. We can attune to our body sensations. We can attune to our thoughts, feelings. It depends where we are kind of attuning to. But if I may use just a few seconds, it's really we have just done a long meditation, so I don't want to do long. But if you can just close your eyes for, or you may choose to close or not. It's up to you. But if you could take a moment to see if you can notice, let's say, 2 sounds inside this room. And then when you are able to identify 2 distinct sounds that you hear, then raise your hand. Okay, now take another few moments to see if you can now distinguish 2 sounds outside of this room, outside. And then when you are able to notice those 2 distinct sounds, raise your hand, please. Okay, so if I may, ask you, what did you notice when we brought our attention to the sounds inside? What did you notice? What happened? The room became quiet, the calm, right? What else? Pardon me? Focus. You focus. Some people close their eyes and like that. You can see that when we bring our focus intentionally onto something, actually, did you feel also calm? Yes, calming down. this is one of the things that the people said that they feel calm when they bring the focus to whether it's the sound, the colors, it can be all one's own breath. But in this case, sensation. Tracking has to do with learning to notice our own sensations. So this may be, as our nervous system gets very dysregulated, with the emotions. If we can notice whether it feels tense or whether we're feeling low and like that, then we can, next part we can do is what's called the resourcing. And in the context of compassion, the resourcing has to do with bringing our attention to something that is where it is comforting, that makes you safe, that that calms you, and those resources can be anything, like the people, the young kid is held by the father. You can feel that both of them in receiving and giving, what kind of feelings there will be, particularly for the child to receiving that embracing care. That can be very calming. Or it can be with pets, not necessarily humans. Sometimes it's in the nature. Sometimes we become kind of tired and stressed out just going for a walk or sitting at the beach or at the sunset. That can be very, very kind of calming and rejuvenating. And so that's what the first part of how receiving, particularly receiving care and compassion, is something that we can learn to bring our focus to. We can learn to attune to it. If we get better at noticing when we're getting out of those resilient zone, that is indicated by our own bodily sensations, then we can choose to bring our attention to something that is soothing, something that is calming. And from our own personal experience, if that is what we can recall in presence of a friend or the parents in the past or the spouse or pets or in the nature and like that. And those resources, are unique. That it's not going to be everyone is not going to have the same resource. It's a different. For example, for me, just to bring to my mind one of my teachers, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, or my own mother, to bringing myself back in the childhood, just held by my mother. Those are instant kind of the nurturing moments for me. But this is something, as individuals, we can learn to notice, track our sensations when we are getting out of, bounce out of the resilient zone, and then bring to those nurturing moments or the resources and to sustain it there. And the practices like mindfulness, mindfulness practice, when we think about the mindfulness, it's true that being in the present moment is a big part of mindfulness. It is true. But the very way that how the mindfulness practice is done, actually, it's very much, has much to do with the resiliency, building resiliency. Let's say what if the resiliency has to do with how quickly we recover from certain adversities, right? Certain challenges or the adversities. It has to, when a certain thing upsets us, if we notice and if we are able to disconnect or disengage from anything that is kind of causing us the emotional stress, and then if we are able to bring our attention to somewhere else where it may be neutral or it's something calming like the nurturing moment, or any task that we are doing at the present, kind of disconnecting from that distressing, something that is distressing, to bring to something soothing or neutral, and then be able to sustain. If we are able to sustain, That is what is a really kind of resiliency muscle. If you think about, we can build like the muscle, we can build that part too. So in the mindfulness practices, very nature of mindfulness practice actually has this. So, for example, the practice that we did earlier with the breathing, that can be, a practice for building resiliency, in the sense that you can use your breath as that anchoring or the nurturing kind of part, bringing a certain monitoring awareness to notice when your attention goes somewhere else. And as you notice, as you gently bring it back and to the breath, to the present, and to sustain it, basically you are developing those three skills. The number one, to be able to sustain your attention where it could be, like with the breath in the present. Notice when it wanders off to somewhere where you don't want to be, whether that's not ideal. And then thirdly, be able to disengage, that. So think about if something we are kind of ruminating, things went wrong, and then we are ruminating and we kind of keep us stuck. If we notice, and if we have greater capacity to disengage, and then be able to sustain it with, at the task at hand or to something else, that would be a great source of resiliency. The second of the hallmarks of burnout was this lack of efficacy. And this is an area I think we all can benefit a great deal by developing skills, building skills for self-compassion, compassion for oneself. Particularly in your field, as our speakers earlier talk about, that how this kind of culture of this to be, superhuman, or to work and then be perfectionist, striving for excellence, all those things, that can actually be the source of exhaustion. That because in real life, we are not superheroes, superhumans. There are certain basic human limitations to us. Our bodies are built in certain ways that whether we want or not, there is a certain basic human limitations. But how do we kind of become mindful of those kind of our certain human imperfections and be able to accept, to embrace that? It has a lot to do with how we see those certain kind of limitations or the certain shortcomings, whether this is something as a kind of failure of oneself or this is something of a shared kind of human limitation. And therefore, we can see that other people also have the certain limitations that not everyone. For example, like that when one of the difficulties in the medical kind of the residencies I saw at Emory at one point, it went viral. One of the videos, one of the residents, just very first in the first couple of months, lost a patient, and he was so devastated, just completely, that ready to commit suicide. And it is hard to kind of have that feeling of that I'm not good enough, that I'm not, it's putting all that pressure on oneself, that if I'm good, I should be able to save the patients and like that. But that's not necessarily, the reflection of your kind of flaw, or there are many factors that go into a patient's recovery. You are only one part. There are many other factors that go into that. So therefore, this idea, that living with this idea that if I'm good, I should be able to do perfectly, I should be the best, I should be able to achieve, whatever kind of goal I set. That is itself is a kind of we are setting for ourselves for those, disappointment and the miseries in many ways. And that's why that this New England Journal, one of the doctors had this article where it says that one of the root causes of this national epidemic of burnout, depression, and suicide is a culture of the performance and achievement that for most of our students begins in middle school and relentlessly intensifies for the remainder of their adult lives. And that is very true. So that's why, self-compassion, I mean, there are, like the Kristen Neff and others have developed this, the self-compassion practices. And research shows that self-compassion, self-compassion is not necessarily just kind of saying that I'm no good. It does not. Self-compassion is simply accepting the limitations that we have. And that actually is associated with emotional resiliency. Self-compassion is also associated with it makes you less afraid to try again. If one is so kind of focused on that I need to be perfect, that can actually cripple, that when there are things that are not that obvious to try. So there are a lot of research that actually shows that with the people with a greater degree of self-compassion have the better emotional health and so forth. So how, if we say that, what are some of the kind of the steps in building self-compassion? It's about, like our last speaker before lunch mentioned about awareness. The perspective has a lot to do. Setting our real expectations realistically. That we want and need, or what I need, what I can be, or what I need to be. There are, if our expectations are unrealistic, of course, unrealistic expectations cannot be met, and therefore, when we fall short of our own expectations, that is, sometimes we may kind of project onto others and be angry at others, or unfortunately, so often, if the mindset is such that if I'm good, I should be able to do that, achieve that, no matter how unrealistic the goal may be, that then oneself becomes the target. Self-blame, self-criticism, and the sense of that, not efficient, and so forth. So therefore, this is something, as I mentioned earlier, that self-compassion can be developed by accepting our shared human imperfection, shared human, limitation. The recognizing that other people also go, have these up and downs, and so forth. But one kind of question always comes up: that if accepting and embracing one's imperfections, is the part of the self-compassion, wouldn't it interfere with our accomplishments, achievements, and so forth? And that's where the self-agency part, the purpose and the kind of the meaning comes. If one can see that what the work that we are engaged, what the purpose, what motivates us, what brings us to this, if we can focus on the purpose, then one can do the best one can be, but not necessarily kind of fixated that what I want to accomplish needs to happen, otherwise that's the failure. So there is a beautiful kind of metaphor in one of the texts in ancient India, the 7th century master known as Shantideva. He gives you this metaphor to convey, this self-agency, but at the same time being realistic. He says that Yet imagine that if we are afraid of kind of hurting ourselves by getting thorns or broken glasses and so forth, if we are afraid of that, and if we attempt to try to cover the whole earth with the leather, can we accomplish that? That will not happen. But by simply covering our own feet with the leather, by putting shoes, it accomplishes the same thing, that we can go out anywhere we are protected. So that's what he meant, when he says that, where would I find enough leather to cover the entire surface of the earth? But with leather soles beneath, or the soles beneath, or the shoes beneath my feet, it is as if the whole world has been covered. That's what that means, is that we cannot have control over everything. What we have control is what we can do. And that is what, we can put the shoes in our feet. We cannot, we cannot cover the whole earth with the leather. Even this small plant, like it's your patient, that you want to see this plant grow and flourish. There are many contributors to that. A gardener can do his or her best, but whether this small plant will grow into a majestic tree, it will depend on many conditions upon which we don't have control over. That all we have is our control over us. We can be 100%, but the many other conditions may or may not align with it. That's that reality. That's what the awareness part has to do. And in the meditation, in compassion, with self-compassion, has to do with not necessarily sitting with eyes closed and like that. This is about something reflecting to see if we can come to this conclusion, if we can see that, if that becomes our lens, if that becomes our mindset, if we can adopt that mindset, if that becomes more of our kind of the lens of our mind, then when the things go wrong, it would not be immediately that this is me. But the number of things can go. I tried my best, and many things can happen. The other thing it really has to do with it, the third part, the depersonalization part. And that is a big issue. Our dean at Emory University, the dean of medical school 4 years ago, Chris Larson, he is a meditator. A very successful surgeon, but he was the dean, and what he realized was that at the medical, in the community, they were not operating at the optimal level, and it had to do with a culture, that how we treat each other, how the surgeons treat the nurses or the others, and if there is not a culture of compassion, the respect and caring for each other, it will kind of ruin the community, and in there that everyone will suffer. And the most kind of, unfortunately, the patients, very patients for whom the physicians and the nurses are there, they will not be able to flourish. So therefore, he actually wanted to see how the compassion might be, introduced in the profession, so that might help with the more harmonious kind of interaction among the healthcare providers there. So, basically, the compassion is something that tenderness, if we think of the tenderness, that happens between our close kind of relatives, our own children, it may be with our friends, maybe not related with blood. It can happen cross kind of species also, as we can see. But certainly among the humans, we are social beings. One of the things that is most important for us is the social connectivity. When we lose that sense of connection, the warmth towards whether it's a patient or the family member or another, that's where we really languish. As Franz de Waal, where he says that this is why next to death penalty, it's a solitary confinement is the worst punishment. The most dreaded is we are built to connect with each other. Compassion is precisely that, that connects with others, because the loneliness, when we fail to have that kind of bond, the connection with others, that's the loneliness. As Dr. Murthy, who was the Surgeon General under Obama administration, he says that it is a healthcare epidemic. I mean, there's, over 40%. Some studies show up to 60% of the population is struggling with loneliness, and it has a tremendous impact on our health, personal health, and on our society as well. While loneliness, kind of impact of loneliness, for example, on longevity seems to be like as high as like somebody smoking 15 cigarettes per day, or it is actually has worse impact on our longevity than obesity. But how much attention is paid to build that social bond, social connection, compassion, or empathy? That's what. So it's relatively ancient kind of traditions, and in the medicine itself, that is this has been the kind of one of the key elements of medicine, and in all religions and the societies, the compassion, the caring, empathy has been the kind of the important element of our well-being, and various traditions have found ways to cultivate compassion. So there are basically two ways when it comes to cultivating compassion towards others. It's about, one has to do with, that if we can identify with others, that can bring the sense of connection. That everyone is like me, wants to be happy, wants to be free, have limitations, have difficulties, have vulnerabilities, and so forth. This is, again, is a practice of awareness. Another part is appreciation of our interconnectedness. That's one thing about the harmony. That's what the practice is. For example, inside Scoop, one of the exercises that Murthy has introduced at his practice has to do with where the staff, everyone comes together and spends 5 minutes talking about their personal stories. That really connects. I have done this with my students, that like the personal statements. And then the just like me is another one, that to reflect on how everyone around us is just like me. That I have my limitations. I want to be happy and healthy. The others want to be happy, and so forth. So that's one for the kind of the identification. And then further, in terms of the independent kind of working with the depersonalization, no man or woman is an island. I mean, that's really a reflection. If one can reflect that how, for me to do what I do, how many people are needed. We sometimes call this the interdependence drawing, an activity we do, to see how many people are needed for. And there, if you are a surgeon, you need the nurses and the whole staff. And that kind of awareness can build a sense of appreciation, gratitude, and then sense of connection. I just want to leave this with this statement from Einstein, that as with other things, how poignant he was in pointing out this fact that the connectedness is the key for compassion. A human being is part of a whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. We experience ourselves, our thoughts and feelings, as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest us. Our task must be to free ourselves from the prison by widening the circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. The true value of human being is determined by the measure and the sense in which they have obtained liberation from the self. We shall require a substantially new manner of thinking if the humanity is to survive. The compassion and empathy is that new, the new manner of thinking for us to survive and flourish. Thank you so much.